And he's done a double header. He did Unity this morning and now us, and we're grateful.
Thank you, Reverend Bonnie. It's my honor to be here. I'm sharing with you one of my father's favorite sayings, and so it's an honor to do that. I'm not used to having it so close, so I'll try to bellow out with my embellishment. My son asked me, back when I had brown hair, how do you recognize a person on Father's Day? He's the one with the brand new tie. Times have changed, have they not? Well, today I see many different faces and many different features of fathers here in the crowd. Some are masculine, some are feminine, others are single parents, and yet others are sisters and brothers raising sisters and brothers. A father is a leader, and fathers come in different sizes, different shapes, and different sexes, for we are all fathers by our leadership. Now, Parent Magazine describes a good father as one who takes the effort and spends the time with their children. Maybe it's to tell a joke. Maybe it's to share or ask, how was your day? Or maybe it's being at one of those competitive sports and being the best rooter for that particular child. Just being readily available for that child. They are there when they are needed the most. And it could be as simple as just a hug. But that's what fathers are about. Now, they don't have to be the Beaver Cleavers, and I'm going back in time, I know that. Or the Father Knows Best. Or the Dan from the Roseanne Show. For our images on fathers from TV have changed. They have changed a great deal. One of the common sayings back in my days was, come on, Dad, let me borrow it. I'll be careful. I won't scratch it because what harm can become of me using the card? Well, that's changed. It's the credit card. This is the new saying for the new generation. And it's funny how all of a sudden your notes are backwards and upside down. I believe life is like a game of solitaire. You don't know what's going to turn up next, and so it is with fathers. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, Unity's co-founders, were the balance of the Unity movement. And that by that I mean, yes, they had two sons, and they played a great deal of leadership in their families' lives. But Charles was known as the intellectual side of that couple. He was the science man. He was the masculine side. However, metaphysically, he represents the center of wisdom in our head. Now, Myrtle was the female side of that. She was open, trusting, caring, heart-giving. Metaphysically, Myrtle represents the center of the wisdom in our hearts. Yes, these two roles not only fashioned the Fillmore's family, but they also fashioned the Unity movement with their heart and head skills of leadership personalities. Well, now, at the age of 5, I wanted to explore the entire world. And I had 3 older sisters. Maybe some of you can relate to that. They were in charge of keeping a close eye on me and keeping me safe close to home. My older sister would tie my Oshkosh Bagosh bib overalls to the clothesline with a rope, and I would run up and down the clothesline to keep safe, or until I got so tired I just finally fell on the ground. Until one day I figured out how to unsnap the snaps. Well, it was a cool, sunshiny Monday morning, and that means it was laundry day. I had been tied to the clothesline as normal, and then I heard from the laundry room, "Where's Georgie?" My mother yelled out. And my sister would yell back, "He's right here, tied to the clothesline, safe." Well, my sister finished putting all the clothes, and she started to the house, and she turned to me and said, "Georgie, I want you to stay here and go nowhere else." Well, as soon as the door slammed, I unpopped the snaps, and away I went. The bib overalls slipped to the ground, and I made a bare-legged beeline towards my tricycle. Now, Sarge, our German Shepherd's dog, followed me to the front yard. Now, Sarge was brought home from the war by my uncle, and so he was my protector. His job was to keep me close and safe to home. But for some unknown reason, Sarge darted down the street. And so I followed after him. Sarge, come back, Sarge, come back. Down the road, I raced as fast as Sarge could run in my bare legs. All of a sudden, Sarge stopped. He turned to look at me, and I stopped. And behind Sarge, with this huge dark cloud, with his large-sounding hoof noises, Sarge started barking and took off towards the house, and I turned to follow him, and sure enough, there on the porch were my three sisters and my mom yelling, Georgie, look. So I started for home and followed Sarge as fast as I could, once again on my trike. The cloud got within about 2 feet of me, and all of a sudden, I felt my sister's hand grab the back of my shirt. Well, she picked me up, a trike and all, because I wasn't going to let go of that trike, and threw me and her over a 3-foot-high fence, and Sarge followed us over the top. Well, lo and behold, the noise passed in front of us, this huge cloud, and I looked out and said, pretty cows. And my sister, panting and still trying to catch her breath, said, you owe me a life. Well, now today, some 65 years later, when we meet, she says, you owe me a life. How's it doing? But now for the rest of the story. The trike got put away for a month, and they fixed the snaps so I couldn't undo them. And I heard my mother say, when your father gets home, George Allen McGaughey, he will have a talk with you. Well, as you recall, when you got called all 3 names, you were in doo-doo. Well, when my father did get home, he came to me and said, let's go. He was a man of few words. Well, we walked out the back door, and I turned right to go to the woodshed, and he turned left to go to the front street. He said, no, come on. Well, he got to the front street, and he stopped right there, and he put his hand down, his big hands, and so I grabbed one finger. And he says, you know you're not to go in the street without a parent from now on, right? And I just hung my head and said, yes, that's true. I squeezed his hand, and he stared back down at me with a laugh and said, let's go get a Coke. So we walked across the street together for a 5-cent bottle of Coke and $1 million worth of leadership. Now, contrary to popular beliefs, positive thinking is not thinking about everything working out great all the time. Positive thinking is focusing on what's present, what's going well, and how do you plan to make the situation better. I was reminded of this when I was 17 by my dad. I got my draft card, and my draft card, you had numbers back then on the order of draft. Mine was a 3. That means I was going to Vietnam. He said, not being scared is not being brave, but being brave is being scared. War has a way of making men out of us, but keeping alive to enjoy the rest of your life is important too. When he finished, he gave me a big hug. I too, like E.B. White, I rise in the morning torn between a desire to improve or save the world, or a desire to enjoy or savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day, right? However, there are things that change our lives forever. You think the world would stop, but it doesn't. It just keeps rolling right along. It's up to us to formulate our own plan of action, to move on with what we want to gain. I'm reminded of this daily from a friend named Joe. It's a true comfort for the soul when somebody reaches out into a compassionate way to help when you are struggling. These were the words from the Army Corps, from the Army nurse on the air medevac on the way back from Vietnam. We're called to show up in ways for others, to be present to what is, and to help where we can. I watched them carry Joe's body off the plane that day. You see, Joe was a first sergeant, a black soldier, and he died on that plane. I held his hand all the way home. The nurse's leadership skills, like that of my father, just knew it was the right thing to do. One of my father's favorite sayings is, knowledge is never known to enter the head via an open mouth. Stop, look, listen. He taught his children, but listening is the most important thing to do. I learned later that Joe's favorite song was, I dream in times gone by when hope was high and life worth living. I dreamed that love would never die. I dreamed that God would be forgiving. I also learned early in life is a matter about choices. Every choice you make makes you. To that, I'm reminded that hate and love are both four-letter words, and I have a choice when choosing which one. What do I choose in that given moment? To hold Joe's hand was a choice I will never forget. And so I pulled John 3:16 from a new Bible, not the old standard version, so it maybe sounds a little bit different, but this is the way it reads. This, you see, is how God's loved the world, enough to give his only special Son, so that everyone who believes in him should not be lost, but be shared in the life of God. This is true for my heavenly Father as well as it is for my earthly father. The Lord's Prayer is a good example of how we show up in the world. Our Father's Prayer, sometimes it's what it's called, has been spoken in many different languages in many places around the world. But however, metaphysically, I translate it this way. The Father and I are one. One in spirit, one in fatherly love, and wise beyond all appreciation. Several years ago, after giving my father's eulogy, my sister came to me and said, "You can make a sinner into a saint." No, I just remember forgiving my father years ago. For some of the mean things he did. He was a tough guy. It was the age in which he grew up, and he was taught, spare the rod, spoil the child. Punishment came very fast for him, but however, he did his best with what he was taught. I choose not to carry on his punishing skills as a young father. I remember when I was a teen, I viewed God as that old white guy with the long beard that sat up on the clouds. Some of you are laughing, must have done that also. God would say, "St. Peter, see that George kid down there? Put a couple more black marks in his book." Well, I think I got up to 5 pages before I realized that was not the case. I changed my mind one summer when I was with my grandfather. He would go to the fields late in the afternoon and into the early evenings, about sunset, to change the irrigation water. On this summer eve, as the sun was setting, he leaned on an old irrigation shovel out on the field, lost in his dreams. He finally declared in a very muted voice, "Have you ever seen anything so beautiful?" "This is what heaven looks like to me," he said. Now, at this moment, I recall Luke 17:21, "For the kingdom of God is within you." My grandfather saw everything good, even in the seeds, the water, the earth. "For this is where God lives," he said. He added with a smiling, watching the rows of corn and water drip down the long rows that eve. I stood watching with him, and my world changed. It was heaven sent. And I stood in the middle of heaven with my grandfather. If you'd like to find inspirational help to help others, open your mind and hearts on your own journey of awareness. Become a father. Here are a few truisms for fathers today. Fatherhood is pretending the best present you love the most is soap on a rope. When my wife and I got married, I had to clean out the closet, and sure enough, there were 4 or 5 of them in there. My father gave me the greatest gift anyone could give any person. He believed in me. A good father is one of the most unsung, unpraised, unnoticed, yet one of the most valuable assets in our society today. And from Proverbs 1, 8 through 9, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Wise words were never spoken from my earthly father. Listen to your mom. Some of my mom's sayings were, don't sit too close to the TV, you'll go blind. TVs were this small then. Clean your plate. There are starving children all over the world, especially in India. And for Ada to sit around the table, that was probably the first thing you did, cleaned your plate. If I asked Mom, can I go to Johnny, she would say, go ask your father. Now, I don't know about all these truisms, but my mother and father were great leaders in their own unique ways. Not perfect, but that's not what mothers and fathers are about. They are here to teach us we have choices. Here are my choices, they would say. Learn from them, use them, or not. You are one of my choices, they would say. And now you have your own choices to be made. One of the last encounters I had with my father, I will always cherish. I lived in El Paso, Texas, and traveled back and forth to Denver several times a year to see my parents. My father had gotten older, and he had dementia. He couldn't remember my name, but he remembered who I was, his son. I'd spent a long weekend with them. I was ready to head out the door on that Sunday eve. To say goodbye, I remember he raised his big hands. I went over there and grabbed him, and he said, you're welcome here anytime. These are the words of a lifetime I had waited to hear. He had given them to me in the last day I would see him alive. I wrapped my big hands and kissed him on the forehead and said, it would be my pleasure. I love you. And so I departed. Now, several months later, I would have a strange encounter with his spirit once again. I was at Unity Village going to school to become a licensed Unity teacher. I had been to his funeral and had done his eulogy and said my goodbyes. I thought, forever. While at school, I loved to get out and jog around the paths, the golf courses, and out and through the woodlands. Starting up a rocky path there on the ground was a very shiny object. So I reached down, almost stepping on it to pick it up. And as I brought it up, I saw it was a butterfly. And I began to study it. It had a long, narrow face and big hands. Then the words swept over me. You're welcome here anytime. I stood in the silence there for a moment and smiled, for I knew who it was. Thank you, Dad, I said as I raised, and the butterfly flew away to the treetops. Disappeared, never to be seen again, but I will never forget my father's departure in 2 ways. So I offer this affirmation to you on Father's Day. You're welcome here anytime. Stop, look, listen, listening being the most important of this. Happy Father's Day, everyone.